Okay, good morning. Sorry for the late start, but it sort of has had a domino effect from this morning. Welcome to our panel discussion, The Imperative of Palestinian Political Renewal. I am Safwan Masri, Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar, and it is my privilege to partner with the Doha Forum to curate this event on behalf of my colleagues at Georgetown. As a provider of bachelor's and master's degrees in international affairs and diplomacy for students here in Qatar, across the region, and the Global South more broadly, we appreciate that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs invited Georgetown to share our perspective as part of this vital and urgent discussion. At GUQ, we've been engaged on the topic of Palestine for many years. Over the past year in particular, and especially over the past 2 months, we have expanded and intensified our related programming. The key question our panelists today will explore is what happens next? More specifically, who will govern Palestine once the dust settles? How do we build political capacity? We heard from the Palestinian Prime Minister this morning, and I think this will be a good opportunity to challenge much of what was shared on the stage. How do we build the capacity to effectively articulate and advocate for Palestinian political aspirations, freedoms, and rights? And what form of polity should we Palestinians work towards? From where and from whom should the Palestinians look to for support? This conversation, which will be moderated by MSNBC's Mehdi Hassan, will feature myself and 5 distinguished panelists. I'm confident that the observations shared over the next 50 minutes will be insightful, nuanced, counterintuitive, and provocative. Today's discussion starts but does not end here. We will pick it up on Tuesday, at which time there will be an intensive workshop to explore the current dynamics on the ground, as well as third-party interests at play within the context of geopolitical fluidity, multipolarity, and non-alignment, particularly as it relates to actors from the Global South. So to get started, let me make some introductions. Our moderator, Mehdi Hassan, is guest anchor and on-air political analyst at MSNBC, where he hosted the Mehdi Hassan Show for the past 3 years. To my left is Rula Shadid, Program and Advocacy Director at the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. To her left is Omar Rahman, a research fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs here in Doha. To Omar's left is Sami Abu Shhadeh, member of the National Democratic Assembly Party, or Balad, and former member of the Knesset. And finally, Waddah Khanfar, president and co-founder of Al-Sharq Forum and chairman of Common Action Forum, and former Director General of Al Jazeera Network. Thank you all for attending, and Mehdi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Safwan. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Mehdi Hassan. It's actually my first Doha Forum since, I think, 2018. I haven't been here for about 5 years, so it's a pleasure to be back. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it, but I found myself with a lot more free time recently. It's sad, though, that we're meeting at this forum in the shadow of another Middle East war, another conflict, another bombardment of Gaza. You heard Gita in the plenary session talk about the numbers. We're looking at over 17,000 dead right now, over 1 million people displaced. The FT calling it the most intense aerial bombardment of a urban area since World War II. And of course, over 6,000 children killed. So a lot has changed, most of it in a bad way. I'm here as a journalist, but I'm also a Muslim, and I think those of us who grew up in Muslim communities know that at some point someone asked the question, why aren't Muslims united? And then they asked the question, why aren't Arabs united? And then looking at this particular conflict, why aren't Palestinians united? Today we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about political renewal. We're going to talk about Palestinian national aspirations, political freedom, civil and human rights. Is there a strategy for self-empowerment and self-determination? Is there an appetite for institutional reform and democratic renewal? And who better to ask those questions to than this expert panel? And I hope we'll have time to take some questions from the audience too. But let me just kick off. Wada, I'm going to start with you over there at the end and say that the 9/11 analogy has been thrown around by the Israelis since October the 7th. And I want to apply the 9/11 analogy to Palestinians and talk about how many Palestinians have died and how traumatic what has happened in Gaza has been for Palestinians. After 9/11, people in America said 9/11 changed everything. To what extent has Gaza changed everything for the Palestinians? Little button on the bottom.
Okay, thank you very much, Mahdi. Thank you, Safwan. We had many 9/11s, in fact, but they were not recognized. So this might be one of the most recognized 9/11s that the Palestinians had. And the recognition of it is because of the cruelty and the genocide that the Israelis are committing in Gaza. The impact of it is going to be very severe, not only amongst the Palestinians, where we are going to debate this, but in my opinion, in the soul and the spirit of the Muslim nation, the Arab world, and internationally. This is a defining moment, and it should be, in a way or another, understood as a new beginning for a serious situation, for a serious understanding. We have been living for the last 40 years under an illusion of something called peace process. Yeah. And what I'm scared of right now is to be again seduced into another Madrid-style, Oslo-style kind of nonsense, basically, where we all of us sit together, we whitewash the Israeli crime that has been committed, and the international community feels good about itself because, okay, we have kick-started a new peace process and everyone is happy. We take nice photos, we go home, and the process continues forever, doesn't reach any conclusion until next 9/11. So this is what is the meaning of this moment. We need to be true about what has happened during the last 40 years, and we should not at all repeat the same mistake that we have been doing for a while, thanks to the international, so-called American-led international community and the Israeli rejection of any serious approach to resolve the conflict.
But just to follow up very briefly, for the Palestinian leadership, has this changed? Has this war changed things, or is it the same? Carry on as usual, business as usual.
Of course, let me say this. If the Palestinian leadership does not understand that this is a moment of change, it doesn't deserve to be a leadership. This is number one. Second, if the Palestinian leadership does not understand that this is the moment to really have a Palestinian project, a Palestinian understanding, rather than to appease the ceilings and the very low ceiling of the Israeli and the American conditions, it means also it will lose legitimacy, plus it will lose at all the purpose of its existence.
Okay.
So this is actually the moment for Palestinians to come together. And when I say Palestinians, I don't mean Gaza and West Bank, by the way. I mean Gaza, West Bank, the Palestinians in diaspora, and the Palestinians inside Israel or in the side 1948 territories, because the unity of the Palestinians at this moment in time should be taken into consideration in any national Palestinian project for the future.
Okay. Rula, is this a moment for, is this an opportunity in the horrors of Gaza and the tragedy and emerging from the ashes and all the other cliches we use about these war zones? Is there an opportunity for Palestinians, as well as not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but across the world, to reframe the conversation, rebalance the way we talk about Gaza, the West Bank, the occupied territories, Israel, Zionism, and more?
Okay, so Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Mehdi, for that. And before we start, I would like us to just take 10 seconds to remember the lives of the over 16,000 Palestinians killed. Every life mattered. Every person meant the world to another person. Thank you. Yes, indeed. The answer is absolutely yes. I think this comes also in a situation where we can call an opportunity. An opportunity to look at not only the failures from what you have mentioned earlier, the 30 years of different rhetoric, of different paradigms that really didn't reach anywhere. In fact, what we are seeing is just an escalation and a worsening escalation of what is happening to Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but also elsewhere. It is, I think, time, and this forum is all about change and dialogue and to see innovation coming into the picture. So what does that look like? It does look like a change of narrative, maybe, because any solution or any situation cannot be treated without having the right diagnosis. So if I want to say, and this is not an opinion anymore, but actually there are facts on the ground that are showing so much that this situation is a 75 years of a colonial project. And why am I saying that? Again, this is not an opinion. If you look at the facts, if you look at what is colonization, it is the ethnic cleansing, it is the expansion of settlements, illegal settlements. It is the mass imprisonment. It is the confiscation of land. It is the mass killing of people, mainly the majority are civilians. This is what a colonial project is, and this is what we are seeing. Without that, without being, and this is...
But does that require, Rula, the Palestinian leadership, activists, civil society, to reframe the entire struggle as being anti that?
Exactly. I mean, it's about time. It's about time to say that everything that we have tried has failed. And this is not, it is seen, it is considerably, today we heard about different ministers actually saying that we have not reached anywhere for the past 30 years. So yes, the problem is that we are not recognizing the situation as it is. We're not actually calling the situation as it is. We are looking into Palestine as fragmented. We're looking into West Bank, Gaza, 48, etc. So it is the time to reframe because that is what we need to use into finding, okay, so how do we deal with the situation? How do we come to the unity of the Palestinians if we don't recognize in the first place that the fragmentation of these people is very intentional and systematic? So yes, of course, we need to start entering those words, both politically but also legally, which has a very, very strong base for it, okay, even in many international conventions.
Omar, Wada and Rula have talked about mistakes that were made in the past, opportunities that were missed. I'm always reminded of that rather notorious, infamous, many would say disingenuous line from Abba Iban, which is the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Going forward, what opportunities are there now for potential Palestinian leaders, existing Palestinian leaders, to both reframe Palestinian society and Palestinian democracy, whatever that looks like, and we'll come on to that in a moment, but also in terms of the international struggle?
Thank you, Safwan and Mahdi, and to our Qatari hosts. It's an important question, and obviously, I mean, we're here to discuss Palestinian political renewal because the state of Palestinian politics today is in a total state of fragmentation, dysfunction, and so the imperative is on taking that first step. Although Israel has the power to influence events on the ground, nothing is going to happen until Palestinians put their own political house in order. And when you're talking about events in the region, opportunities that need to be taken, I mean, despite the tragedy of today, there needs to be a steward, a Palestinian political agent that can navigate these kind of international events at home, and we've seen the failure of that to happen. I mean, just juxtapose today with what happened a year, 2 years ago in Ukraine, and the the actions taken by Zelensky on the international stage to kind of rally the international community for his cause.
Are you saying Mahmoud Abbas doesn't have the dynamism of Vladimir Zelensky?
That goes without saying, but it's not just that. There's an absence of that effort whatsoever. I mean, where Abu Mazen has disappeared, and the Palestinians are suffering from that. Not just from that. I mean, take over the last 2 years, when you're talking about the emergence and the mainstreaming of the apartheid framework. The 5 major human rights organizations around the world are saying that Israel is an apartheid state. Where is the Palestinian political agent to steward, take advantage of those opportunities? So it doesn't just start with today, but the imperative of today is critical, and the Palestinians are at a total loss in that regard. And this is really one of the tragedies that's facing Palestinians.
So we will come back to Abu Mazen and Palestinian democracy in a moment, although now I can't get the image of Abu Mazen in a green T-shirt out of my head. But we will come back to him in a moment. Before we do, let's bring in Sami. Rula and Omar have both talked about the fractured Palestinian community. You are a Palestinian living in Israel, often overlooked, forgotten, both by Palestinians and supporters of Israel, anyone who comments on this conflict. I've got to ask first question to you. I'm sure the crowd would be interested. I'm very interested in knowing, what has been the reaction on the ground with Palestinian communities in Israel to what happened on October the 7th?
Thank you very much, Mahdi and Dr. Safwan. First of all, I think we are here today because we have failed as Palestinian people and Palestinian leadership to have a just solution for one of the most just cases I have ever read about historically, compared with other peoples and nations. We should be clear and honest about that. And I think the main problem of the Oslo agreement is that it did not want to see, or did not go back to the roots of the Palestinian question in order to get to a solution. Okay? And they have decided to, because of a lot of historical circumstances, and we don't have time to go in, to ignore the majority of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian leadership in the Oslo agreement decided to ignore the Palestinian citizens who lives within the state of Israel in their political solution. And they decided also to ignore 50% of the Palestinian people who are refugees all over the world. And the issue, and it was dealt off from the 1967 war, while the main Palestinian question came to the world as a refugee issue in the Nakba in the 1948. If we will continue in this way, we will not be leading to anywhere also in the future. So this thing must be talking about. What's happening nowadays within the Palestinian citizens, who are 20% of the population in the state of Israel, what I usually call them the forgotten 1.7 million Palestinians. We are forgotten or ignored because we are making too much trouble for both sides. They don't know how to deal with us. Usually the world and the current Palestinian leadership, part of them don't know about us at all. Those who do know about us don't have any solution. So we are not, any suffering is totally denied because nobody, and it seems too complicated, so nobody wants to talk about it. We are also Palestinians, but we carry the Israeli citizenship in the same time. So it doesn't fit in any square that they built before, so they prefer not to deal with it. Now, Israel is dealing with us as enemies. And if someone still remembers when this fascist Netanyahu declared war, he declared the war on 4 different fronts. He declared war on Gaza, he declared war on the West Bank, he declared war on the northern borders with Lebanon, and he said that there is also a 4th front, the internal front. Whom did he mean by the internal front? He meant us, 20% of the population, which means this fascist deals with us as enemies. We are ignored from the Palestinian famous or official or any kind of leadership you can call it. So it puts us in a very complicated situation. I want to summarize with what's happening nowadays for the people. We are considered in citizens in the only democracy in the Middle East. This only democracy in the Middle East is leading a genocide on our people. Now, I come from the city of Jaffa. My people, the city of Jaffa was, and now we're talking about ethnic cleansing, was totally ethnic cleansed in the 1948 war. 98% of the population were expelled. Part of them, those who went south, are in Gaza. So my state now is killing every big family in Jaffa. We have relatives in Gaza. Our families are being killed. Our state is not allowing us to express our views about it. But we are all against the war. We are all against bloodshed. We are all against this violence. We want this war to end. We are not allowed to demonstrate at all. Any kind of demonstrations are not allowed. And the Israeli police is threatening all the leadership that they are going to use live bullets in our demonstrations. In this only democracy of the Middle East. So there is no freedom of expression. The Prime Minister declares on us as the fourth front, which means he and his fascist government with his terrorist ministers are dealing with us as enemies. We are not allowed to have any political activity against the war. This includes, and I'm going to summarize with this, and it was this crazy thing. First of all, we wanted to have a march against the war. It was prevented by the Israeli police. Then we said, okay, march is too much. Let's go for a demonstration in one of our cities. When I say one of our cities, because the Zionist project, as a racist project, has 90% of the population lives Arabs alone and Jews alone. So we said we'll have a demonstration in one of our cities. This was also prevented. So we said this is also too much. Let's do a small talk of Arab and Jewish intellectuals and politicians who are against the war in the city of Haifa, which is a mixed city. This also was illegally prevented, and the owner of the hall, small hall of 100 people, was threatened by the Israeli Shin Bet, and he was terrified that he's not answering the phone anymore.
Okay.
And then we were also prevented from having a small, and in Israel we don't need alliances for this, okay? But we were also prevented from having a small, less than 50 people protest, and we are chased all the time. So students are being expelled from the universities with not illegally. Doctors are being expelled from hospitals illegally because they have put on their social media a human sentence. Same with workers. It's a chaste minority.
Thank you for that insight, and I suspected it wouldn't be one that fills us with much optimism. Safwan, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Palestinian leadership. If we're going to talk about Palestinian renewal, we have to talk about what already exists. We just heard Prime Minister Steyer in the plenary speaking, long on sound bites, short on actual solutions. We have President Mahmoud Abbas, who by my count is 18 years into a 5-year presidential term, which is nice work if you can get it. What do you do about a Palestinian leadership that is seen as undemocratic in the West Bank, and by the world, for sure, as terroristic in Gaza? These are the factions, Fatah, Hamas. This is what's out there. These are the choices, like Republicans and Democrats in the US, two-party system. How do you make sense of a Palestinian political system which is dominated by these forces?
You can't. You simply cannot make any sense of it. And, time is of the essence now. People are getting killed, what is it? Every 10 minutes we're losing a child in Gaza, right? We cannot wait until the dust settles and then start talking about renewal. We have to confront the issues now. Waddah, you talked about the risk of the PA losing its legitimacy. The PA is illegitimate. The PA does not have any credibility. Not in Ramallah, not in Gaza, not in 48, not amongst the refugees. As you said, Mahdi, 18 years ago were the elections. In Prime Minister Steyer's this morning, what I saw were populist sound bites that drew applause, right? Because he talked the talk. But there was a lot of defensiveness and insecurity behind it. When he talks about Hamas being a junior partner, What was that about? Part of the mosaic. I mean, let's not forget, the attempts by the PA to eliminate Hamas. But Hamas has now risen in terms of its popularity. I think we need to move past the existing leadership. Hamas will not be able to govern. It hasn't governed, and Hamas will not be allowed to govern. The PA has lost any credibility and legitimacy on the streets when you talk to young Palestinians in Ramallah, in Hebron, Bil Khalil, Beit Lahem, Bil Quds. They tell you what they are interested in are their rights. They think that my generation is obsessed with geography. They don't care about two-state solution, one-state solution. What they want is their rights. And so to really, come back to answering your question, there has to be an inclusive, comprehensive process of consultation and of, the leading intellectuals and leading activists and the youth coming together. And it has to include, as was mentioned earlier, everybody. And Unity Intifada, by the way, showed that there is unity, right? People came in the busloads from Nasra. Gaza, Palestinians of Gaza, and that's another thing, and I'll give you back the microphone. We need to be careful also because words mean something and symbolism is everything. We refer to people like Sami, Arab Israel, Arab ال48, ما نقولش حتى Arab Israel. We refer to the Palestinians of Gaza, Al-Ghazawiyya, Gazans, okay? We're all Palestinian. We're all Palestinian. I mean, Israel does not want to recognize you, Sami, as a Palestinian citizen of Israel. It wants to recognize you as Arabim, right? Which is derogatory, by the way, to begin with, in terms of its expression. So there is unity among Palestinians, and I think an inclusive process, a comprehensively inclusive process that brings together people on the inside, people on the outside, in consultations about the future is what is needed.
So that would be the ideal medium to long-term solution. In the short term, that's not going to happen realistically. I want to bring in Wada and say, when I hear the word unity used all the time, I'm reminded of the unity governments that we've seen come and go amongst the West Bank and Gaza political factions. There's talk now, Becky mentioned this to Mohammed Shteya earlier, about unity government. I remember the last quote-unquote unity government, reconciliation government, I think it was 2014, lasted about 9 months. Is there any prospect that we're going to see an attempt post-Gaza, if we can use that phrase, which is offensive in many ways, to form a Fatah-Hamas government again? Is that even on the cards?
If that is part of a bigger imagination about what should happen, the answer is yes. And it should be, actually. Technically speaking, on short term, Fatah and Hamas are invited right now to sit and talk about this issue, how they are going to resolve it. Fatah will, okay, you said PNA lost legitimacy. I differentiate between Fatah and PNA to an extent. Now, Fatah is going to lose more legitimacy if it does not step forward and try to do something about the current situation. Because PNA, I don't think they could do. They are controlled eventually by regulations, laws, frameworks, and procedures that the Israelis define, and they are a tool in the hand of the occupation. So Fatah and Hamas could do that. An interim government for about 2-3 years, technocrat if you wish, where we can stabilize the situation. It could end with elections in West Bank, Gaza, and in Jerusalem in order to have a proper legitimate leadership for the Palestinians and to undo what has been done during the first elections that we had in 2006. That could be the situation. But this is not actually what we could call a proper Palestinian leadership. Because we should not forget that before Oslo, we had PLO. And PLO, in a way or another, is an umbrella that represents also Palestinians who are in diaspora. And it was something recognized internationally. It has been weakened. It does exist now as a shell, but it has been weakened. And UPLO, if you would think about it, which has much better ceiling than PNA and many other governments that could be formed in the occupied territories.
And which might be a little younger.
Younger, more representative. And in this case, it should be Palestinian, the decision of it should be Palestinian, not to please anyone, not to accommodate yourself.
Okay.
Hamas has to be part of it and should be legitimized, because as Safwan said, Hamas not only has popularity, Hamas also has legitimacy. It might not have the legality needed to go forward independently as a government.
Let me jump in on there and bring in Omar, and I want to ask you something with your political analyst, US-based hat on. What Wada is saying is clearly true sitting here in the Middle East. An American policymaker, a European policymaker will say post-October 7th, what are you talking about, Wada? Hamas doesn't have any legitimacy in our eyes. It can't be part of anything. How do you solve that?
Question, and that same question was in my mind when Wadah was talking, and Safwan I agreed with completely when he's talking about, but we have to understand that the Palestinians live under layers of oppression. There's both the oppression of the occupation from the Israelis, and there is the oppression of the political leadership at the PA level. So organizing against that has become almost impossible. When we're talking about a post-October 7th, let's say reconciliation within the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Authority doesn't exist within a vacuum. It's part of a structure that's attached to the Oslo Accords, which is controlled by the Israelis. When Hamas entered the Palestinian Authority back in 2006, that is what, the squeeze was put on the Palestinian Authority, and a coup d'etat was eventually arranged because the Palestinian Authority requires finances, like any institution. Where do those finances come from? They come from the United States. They come from Europe. So bringing Hamas back into a political structure that's under the control, essentially, of the Israelis and the Americans and the Europeans is an impossible situation. So what the Palestinians are facing today, let me finish this, is a lack of pathways to political renewal, both within any institution, both within the Palestinian Authority itself, because you have a stranglehold by a political leadership that's interested, after their own political project failed, in self-preservation rather than resistance, rather than renewal, because it serves their own personal interests, and they're a co-opted leadership. And then the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which, Palestinians want renewed and have renewed it for a long time, is also under the control of the same people. And they have, again, no interest in reform whatsoever. And so they have not allowed a pathway to reform. So Palestinians are really facing a loss of how to break the stranglehold. There's revolution, but again, as we've seen from the Arab Spring, revolution has unintended consequences. You don't know what's going to come against it. You can build an alternative institution to that, but that can take generations to build, and you don't know if it's going to challenge for legitimacy the PLO as it exists. And then the third thing is you had elections, which was a possibility. It's a very flawed concept within the paradigm of the Palestinian Authority, but it was a possibility. But again, the Palestinian Authority leadership, once they realized the Americans didn't actually want elections after Joe Biden was elected, put the kibosh on that, and they canceled it, using Jerusalem as a pretext, handing the Israelis control over your own elections and political systems is a total cop-out. So again, this is the situation that Palestinians face. It is an extremely difficult situation.
Yes, it is.
But it is the reality.
It's amazing when you hear people in America say, well, they haven't had elections, not understanding that the American government was never in favor of such elections. I want to go to Rula, but briefly, you wanted to come in, I think. I saw you eager to jump in on something.
It's okay. Let's go to Rula.
Okay, Rula.
Let's go to Rula.
I actually wanted to ask you about something Safwan mentioned earlier, which is this whole paradigm of statehood, which has been at the central part of a Palestinian political project, building a state, two-state solution, whereas a lot of Palestinians in the diaspora, a lot of younger Palestinians, not interested in talk of states, number of states, but in rights.
Yes, exactly. So first, this is very much related to the narrative. This is very much related to the framing. And we heard the word framing maybe 4 times today in the first session. When the framing is correct, we will understand that it is pretty simple, actually. It is not a complex situation. It is a situation of occupation, apartheid, settler colonial violence. And okay, so what do we do with this situation? The main first thing is to resist it and to actually end the occupation, stop the apartheid. After that, you come into a very normal process of institution building. And this is not unique to Palestine. This is not unique to the Middle East. This has been the situation of every post-colonial situation in the world. Now, In relation to states, I find it very, very intriguing and interesting how many people around the world are so interested in such an internal matter of another people's situation. Do I ever go to Sweden, for example, and tell them, oh, I think you should change the kingdom to a presidential situation because that is what civilization is about? You don't see that happening in other contexts, while in the Palestinian context, you see every single time. Sometimes I actually say I'm not Palestinian just because I don't want to hear the different opinions that people have, because I really don't have I don't want to discuss this with a non-Palestinian just because they have read an article. So the situation today is actually, whether it is 1 state, 2 states, 17 states, I don't care. And I actually can't decide, I can't determine that. Yeah. It is the people of Palestine who needs to determine that. And the solution must involve the inclusion of all Palestinians, because we have seen if you do not include all Palestinians, and this is not emotional, nothing will actually happen. Let me just also say one thing, that we have also seen that the situation in Palestine is actually affecting so much on liberties in Europe. And this is where it comes that the solution to Palestine also is going to be expanded to the entire region. When your own liberties in Europe are starting to be affected by the banning of a certain color or a banning of a certain flag, think about that for a minute and know that it is actually affecting your own liberties inside your own countries. Is that a world that you want to see? Is that a situation where you want a spillover to actually also interfere in your own principle and constitutional rights?
It's a very good point. To save democracy in Palestine, we need to save democracy in Europe and America first. We're running out of time. I want to go to the audience. I'm going to bring in Sami and then Safwan and then go to the audience. If you could both be brief. Sami, Rula just mentioned, you have to include all the Palestinians in whatever that solution is. I noticed recently that the Israeli media were very keen to promote remarks from Mansour Abbas from the Ram party, who was in the last Israeli government, who said, we need to have a two-state solution, Hamas need to get on board with that, etc., etc. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not Palestinian, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that Palestinians in Israel are not allowed to advocate, at least in Knesset for sure, for a one-state democratic binational solution to begin with anyways. So where do Palestinians in Israel stand on all of this?
I think our biggest challenge is a very complicated one, is that this settler colonial project, like other settler colonial projects, was built on racism. But this time the settlers are considered from American and European point of view as the ultimate victim of racism. And they did not expect that the ultimate victim of racism will build a very racist entity of its own. And what is preventing democracy and rights from the Palestinians? Is this urge of this settler colonial project to keep Jewish supremacy in Palestine. Otherwise, there would be no problem. And without confronting the truth, that without challenging, struggling against racism of this, or at least decolonizing this racist element of Zionism, there will be no just solution. This does not mean that there will be no solution, but there will be no just solution for the Palestinian issue. We will not get to a good regime, democratic regime built on human rights for all. So the biggest challenge is that this Jewish state is a racist entity. Now, when we are talking about a solution for all Palestinians, including the Palestinians in Israel, this thing must also be challenged. Now, they are liking very much Mansour Abbas that you mentioned, because he said that this is a lost war. And we cannot change this. And in order to take some rights in this settler colonial project entity, we should, he said, accept reality, which means accept our inferiority, and be ready to live in our homeland, the indigenous population, as second-class citizens. And then we might see probably the settlers will be kind enough to give us some of our rights. I can tell you that the majority of the Palestinian people will never accept their inferiority. We deal with ourselves as the indigenous population and as the owners of our homeland. Now we were weak here and there probably, but this is things that we can fix in the future. In order to get to a better situation, the settler colonial project, now what is unique in Palestine in this settler colonial project, that different than when all the enlightened whites in New Zealand, Australia, North America, they talked about democracy and human rights after the nearly the total determination of the indigenous population. Our settler colonial project that we are struggling against did not choose to kill all of the Palestinians. They chose to expel us. So now, from their own point of view, we are a demographic problem. We are a demographic bomb. To end this settler colonial project, we should address the elements of racism within the settler colonial project in order to decolonize this. Then the issue of rights and equality would become something as if taken for granted. Without talking about these racist elements, the two-state solution that everybody will leave our part of the problem, the Palestinians living within
unresolved.
And not just that, it will be much more complicated.
It
will be dealt with as a very small and marginal minority, and our priority will be kept eternally.
Okay, Safwan, last word to you before we go to the audience.
I'll try to be very, very brief. I mean, I think what we're hearing today is that there is consensus about the need for inclusion, right? Inclusion of Palestinians of all stripes, whatever they are. There is consensus about the existence of unity. I think there is consensus about, I know you're going to have your own summary, so I'm not trying to steal your wind. Okay.
I'm not summarizing anything. I'm not Palestinian.
Okay. I think that there is also agreement and consensus that there has to be a renewal of the imaginative of the process of imagining what the future is and how do we build political capacity, and that we need to involve the youth in that process. We need to move past the rhetoric. We need to move past the failures that have been bestowed upon the Palestinians by various leaderships. We need to move also away from a Ramallah centrist worldview or a Ramallah Gaza centric sort of focus on phenomenon. Right, we need to move past all of that. I do think that one of the very important questions, two very important questions that still lie in front of us. What kind of polity should we aspire to? A two-state solution, is it dead? A one-state reality, not really a solution, is not sustainable as we are seeing, right? Does that into the attempted ethnic cleansing that Israel is pursuing, because that's the only way for it to be a Jewish and a democratic state. Finally, where do we look for support? Because it's not only that the Palestinian leadership has failed the Palestinians. Arab states have failed the Palestinians. I mean, with a couple of exceptions. I mean, we're here in Qatar and, Jordan, but with a couple of exceptions, the Arab states have failed the Palestinians. What came out of the Riyadh emergency meeting
I'm
also?
going to jump in here because I want to bring the order, but I do want to ask quickly, and I'll see which of our panelists want to answer this question. There's a lot of reporting in the US press, a lot of reporting, that Arab leaders, I'm not going to say any names, are saying in public, stop all this, but in private they're saying to Israel, finish Hamas.
Right. So what's your question?
My question is that what you're hearing in your analysis and reporting?
So I want to hear what my colleagues say, but I'll tell you, that doesn't surprise me at all. I thought where you're going to go with this is that what you hear in the West is, why can't the Arabs solve the Palestinian problem? And that is where the problem lies. Palestinian problem, the Palestinian struggle is a universal human rights struggle. It's not appropriate. It should not be appropriated by the Arab states or by the Islamic states.
It's also fundamentally racist to say you're all Arabs, sort it out, because we don't do that with Ukraine.
Exactly.
I'm going to go to the audience and leave my question hanging. We're going to start with Mohammed Shahada, who I want to go to.
I just want to say something regarding
brief,
your last
Sami,
question.
Brief.
But I'll try to be as brief as
No,
well.
you're not going to try. We're going to be brief, because the audience is waiting.
Yeah. I don't think that it's important if the Arab leaders are saying something different in closed meetings, Because Israel did not wait for the Arabs to tell them if to get rid of Hamas or
Fair
not.
point.
Same did Americans. They did not wait for the Arabs to tell them.
That's a good point.
We should see the truth.
Okay,
That Israel wanted that, the Americans wanted that, and they failed. And I think also in the future, they will not be able to eradicate the muqawama thinking from the Palestinian people.
Okay, let's take some audience questions. We've only got, it says time's up, but I'm ignoring that because we started late. We're giving ourselves an extra 10 minutes here, unilaterally. Mohammed's going to go first. If you don't follow Mohammed Shahada on Twitter, please do, because he's been an invaluable journalistic resource since October the 7th. Mohammed, go first. Then I'm going to take a couple of others, then come back to the panel. Go.
How long do I have?
A minute.
Okay. So I'll be very brief. The day before the war, I called a friend of mine in Gaza called Ali. And Ali, we usually talk almost every day about everything in life, Jordan Peterson, to politics, to Trump, to Gaza, to Palestinian politics. And it goes all the way through the same motion. Ali is much smarter than me. He's brilliant. He's a genius. And he's 28 years old, so naturally he's unemployed, like the majority of young people in Gaza, 75%. The way that it goes with him is saying that I'm afraid I'm going to die before I even ever experience living. Unemployment is just a very abstract word, but what it feels in practice for someone in Gaza to be unemployed for 10 years, although highly educated, it means every day is pure shame that eats you alive. Every time he goes out of his bedroom to eat breakfast with his family that he didn't contribute to, every time he asks his parents for pocket money to buy snacks, every time he goes out to see friends or neighbors, his head is bowed in shame. That's his everyday life, pacing the parameters of Gaza. And the way that it goes, him and I, is him trying constantly to come out of Gaza with no availability or try to make things work, freelance online with nothing working out. It's a common symptom of people in Gaza to reach the age of 35 without ever having been able to provide for themselves, get a job, afford to fall in love, start a family, put food on the table. And in a conservative religious society, Muslim society, where there's a belief that suicide is a gateway to eternity in hell, the idea, the thought of suicide has crossed the minds of almost everyone I know, including my own siblings, including my own friends and loved ones. But the night before I talked to Ali, so I talked to him on October 6th. The night before that, I talked to another close friend, Ibrahim. Ibrahim and Ali are arch nemesis. They hate each other so much, but both are very close friends of mine. And the way it goes with Ibrahim is the exact opposite the way it goes with Ali completely. Every time I talk to him, it goes exactly through the same motion. It was the biggest mistake of your life to have left Gaza a few years ago. You should come back immediately. I was just on the phone with Ali. He's telling me it was the best thing that I left, and he wants to leave again. For Ibrahim, he's one of the few in Gaza that became a computer engineer, software engineer, so he's able to make a living online, so a very decent living for someone in Gaza, which is why Gaza should not be reviewed in binaries of a shithole or a heaven, a luxury. It's a bit more complicated, but for Ibrahim, basically, he's able, he can afford to go to all the nice sites in Gaza. There are 5-star hotels, resorts, very nice fancy restaurants. My wife was there. She loved it so much. I will conclude with half a minute. Yep, so basically all of it is collecting dust because the majority of the population cannot afford, which means Gaza has the potential to live but is deprived of it. Now, every time I talk to Ali or Ibrahim, there is a sound in the background. It's zzz, 24/7. It never stops. That's an Israeli Predator drone that's been there for the last 17 years. 24/7. It gets loudest at night, especially in the heat when you need to open the windows to get some air in and you cannot sleep at all. Both Ali and Ibrahim and their families and every single member of my family, I had even to check my distant relatives, every single one of them had their homes bombed this war. What it feels to have a home bombed. In Gaza, it's basic generational work that has gone on for over 50 years. Since the Nakba, you build one brick on top of another. The average income is about $300
Mohammed,
a month.
we're going to have to wrap,
Yep,
unfortunately.
I'm finishing. The average income, $300 a month. A home is about $50,000. It takes generation, and it's wiped out. I had a colleague in university whose home was bombed 2014, also called Ali. The feeling it left him was pure rage and hatred for everything and everyone. The Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Israel, the Egyptians, the Saudi, everyone at all. So I will conclude by saying that the way to move forward with Gaza is, number one, to make more people like Ibrahim but number two, to allow it a chance to live, to open it up again. Because even with Ibrahim, his child is 3 years old, but he's unable to speak even before the war, having speaking problems and screaming and unable to sleep and wetting the bed. So
thank you, Mohammed. We got 2 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 questions, and they're going to be super brief. I'm going to cut you off. Lady in the third row, gentleman there in the middle. Whether we have time.
Very brief. It's
Yes.
Isra Saleh. I'm from Gaza originally. My family is there right now. I'm gonna build on Muhammad what he's just said. Actually, there is something called survival guilt. All the Palestinians and the Gazans around the world, if you are asking them right now, do you want to go back to Gaza to see what is happening there, or at least to participate? For me, when the war starts, I decided that I will go to Gaza because I can't handle to be outside of Gaza. Does it mean that I don't like life, or I don't want to live, or I don't want to be safe? Totally wrong. What is happening actually in Gaza that we know the feel of war? The main idea, before like a few minutes, that you were talking about Shtaya. Please give me 1 minute.
No, I can't give you any time.
1 minute.
Sorry, I specifically said we're out. I'm getting
very
a guy.
specific.
Give me signings. No.
Regarding to Shtaya and the PLO and the occasion of Hamas, the lesson that Israel and America and the European people and the whole world was ignoring Gaza, was ignoring the voices coming out from there. They were like ignoring us for a decade.
Understood.
And now, after this war, because unfortunately you said a word, you said post-Gaza, and this is unacceptable at all, because post-Gaza will never happen if they did not learn the lesson before.
Agreed.
Right now...
Okay. I'm going to have to take another point. Sorry, I did ask for brevity. That gentleman there, and then we're ending. Gentleman, yes, you there. You want to stand up so people can see? Yes?
Thank you. Excuse me, I have a question. By which mechanism the Palestinians can come together and make unified political leadership?
Okay, it's a good question.
Yeah,
we don't need anything more than that. It's a great question. Let's end it with that. Who wants to answer that question? By which mechanism? You guys have talked about future polities, renewal, bringing in younger people, diaspora. What's the mechanism by which Palestinians can do that? Whoever wants to take that gets the last word.
The only mechanism that exists at this moment in time, as a shell, as I said, is PLO, basically. But unfortunately, PLO has been weakened to the most, level by PNA and by Oslo. We need to go back to that. Otherwise, we are not going to have leadership. All the suffering we heard today from Gaza will continue, will be repeated maybe even in West Bank or somewhere else, simply because, this process is faulty and the Palestinians do not really have representative leadership that could convince the Palestinians. Don't forget that what happened on 7th of October, it was because of this faulty situation and the process. If we do not convince the Palestinians that this leadership is representing them legitimately, then we are risking always to have 7th of October and many 11th of Septembers for everyone. Therefore, yes, we need a new beginning, and the world should understand that. They should not impose on us what kind of a criteria, what kind of government, what kind of faction, what kind of personality that should represent the Palestinians. The Palestinians are educated, and they're a nation that could choose their leaders who they could convince the world and themselves of something serious to happen in the future.
Last 5 words to Safwan Masri, and thank you to let me just say the thanks now, and then you're going to get the last 5 words. Thank you to Georgetown Doha. Thank you to the Doha Forum. You get the last word.
Thank you. Just building on what that's one possibility. Civic society, which the PA, as we know, has sort of destroyed in the West Bank. But there is a civic society with international support, particularly from the Global South, that could play a role in this. And I think that's when we look to you, Sami, and we look within the 48 borders where there may be a little bit more experience with at least procedural democracy that can facilitate the process. So some combination of those things, but we'll find a way.
Thank you, Safwan, Rula, Omar, Sami, Wada. Thanks to our panel. Thanks to you all for coming.